So today is going to be a rare deviation for me, lectionary-wise, as we have for a very long time I've been preaching through the Gospels. But there's only about, the lectionary, I think this cycle, we only get about 3 Sundays where we get a text from Job. And I could not resist this Job text this morning. I did not always love the book of Job. I probably had an aversion to it, but at a certain point in my life, it came alive to me, and it just felt like this is where I needed to go for this morning. So, just a little bit of context here for a story that I assume all of you know pretty well. Job is a person who, a man who's upright. The story starts with this courtroom scene where Satan, the accuser, it's formally kind of the first appearance of Satan proper in the Hebrew Bible when you consider, I know in Genesis we have the serpent, but as I can say it's Satan, the first time we get that word is in Job. Job's a very old book, and so we get the language. Satan is literally Satan. It is the accuser. So it's not like a surname like Bob or Phil, like his title is the accuser. He comes and he accuses this man Job. God says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And where this goes, of course, is that Job ultimately is going to lose his wife, his kids, his livestock, everything that matters to him. He's going to have 4 friends who are going to come alongside. And in fairness, they did a lot better than a lot of us do with our friends when they're grieving or suffering. And they did actually, each of them sit with Job for about a week. They sat with him for a minute. But also, I think happens to a lot of us when we're with people who are grieving. Once they open their mouths, it all went south. And the way I see that now is it's not just that their explanations theologically were wrong, but I think they're wrong to assume that there's some kind of suffering that, there just really are not words for. When Jesus shows up after his best friend Lazarus has died, and everybody is looking for the person who gave us the Sermon on the Mount, wisest person's ever lived, to say something great. That's where we get the shortest verse of the Bible. Jesus wept. They see the face of God contorted in grief. Jesus seems to be the only one wise enough to know that there's some pain that cuts so deep that the only thing that you can do is weep alongside those who weep. That ministry of presence, of being in the trenches. But the mistake that Job's friends make consistently is they think that there's an explanation they can give that's going to make all this feel better. It's just not the case. So most of Job is, we've got a little bit of story, and then we get a whole lot of the speeches of Job's 4 friends, which are not helpful. And then it's not until chapter 38, just these last few chapters, where finally God talks back. And for a whole lot of years, I did not find comfort in these words, but I guess, I don't know, when in the darkest season of my life, they came alive to me in a different way, and now I find them to be much more life-giving. Jerry did a beautiful reading, so I don't want to reread all of it, but I'm going to read a couple bits just to emphasize this, if nothing else. Part of what will change whether or not you're going to find anything life-giving in these texts, in Job in particular, how you hear it, really depends on the tone. And that's part of what's difficult about written word in general. Isn't this funny? Now my generation, I text a whole lot more than I talk on the phone. Nicole hates to talk on the phone, by the way, which is a problem for me sometimes because I kind of need an hour and a half every day to debrief. She would rather text for an hour back and forth at length than to talk. It doesn't like talking on the phone. But we all know the problem, right, with any kind of written communication, maybe especially through text messages, is that tone can be very difficult to communicate. So I find often, I'll say something that either I intend to be funny, I'm joking, whatever, and some days, next thing you know, things are a little bit weird. Oh, wait a second, I forget that tone doesn't come through in a text message. Tone doesn't come through in the biblical text sometimes either. And this text will feel very different if the tone you hear it with, I didn't plan to do this, by the way, is something like this. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." No, Pat didn't sleep a lot last night. Did that wake you up? I'm sort of... Like if that's the way you hear this, which is kind of how it sounds. It can feel like a little bit like, who are you, little man? But you don't have to read it that way. You can read it a little bit more like, Steve talks all the time in a council meeting. You can hear this the way that Richard does, the way that like I find the men in our community especially do, the way that we kind of this way of like, in a jovial way, kind of taking it out of each other like a little bit, where it's like, no, this isn't, I don't think this is intended to be ominous. God likes Job. God vindicates Job. There's a playfulness to this. Tell me, little man, since you know so much, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me more about your great knowledge. I'll read on a little bit more. Who determined his measurements? Surely you know. You know all about this. Who stretched the line upon it? Or what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band? Let's see, we read on to verses 34 through 41. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, or that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings so that they may go and say to you, here we are? If you're not picking up on this, the subtext is everything that God's asking Job, he's saying, I can do that. I can do that. Can you do that? One of my favorite parts, because I love the sea monster, Leviathan. There's a great section here where God says, can you put a hook through Leviathan's nose and make it a pet for your daughters? And the idea being like, I could do that. I could do that if I wanted. Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding of the mind? Who has the wisdom to number the clouds? Do you, Job? Or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for a lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? When they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their cover, who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wonder about for lack of food? Tell me, Job, do you know how to do any of those things? Of course, the answer to all these things is no. So we hear this not as a rebuke of Job, because once again, God likes Job and vindicates him over against his friends. And this is more like how God talks to his friends. Even if you hear the tone differently, it still seems like kind of a strange way to bring comfort, right? Because when you have lost everything, what good does it do you for God to remind you that he's the one who saw the stars of the morning sing together for joy? Like, what good does all that do? Because my sense whenever I read this text, and I've got to think this is the effect for Job, is that I read all this and I feel incredibly small. Like, I feel incredibly small. It's one thing I love. Some of you love to camp. It's a great time of year for that. One of the things I love about being out in the sky. Geographically, Oklahoma is not my favorite place, I'll be honest with you. But when I go back, that's the thing that always kind of blows me away. Oklahoma, you have like the greatest sense of just the sky, just the vastness of things. And when I'm out in it, I feel very, very small in a way that really is a gift. Because I, like all of you, am a little too tethered to my electronic devices. And I feel like the thing that my electronic devices are always telling me low-key, like this is what I'm always hearing, is that you're a really big deal. The world revolves around your likes and preferences. Everything that you think about is super important. And that's what social media kind of teaches us. That's what technology teaches us. Nature always tells us the opposite. When it's not, you're really, really big. You're really, really important. It's all like, oh, you're really, really small. And when we see, I like to go to the nature park there at DePaul. Beautiful. Anybody else like to go to the nature park? It's always wild to me because I guess the fact that it was a quarry and stuff before, it looks so alien. You turn a certain corner where I feel like I'm not in Indiana anymore, and like it's kind of like it just feels like a whole nother world. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking out there, and I just happened to, what do you call those black vultures? Are they just black vultures? What would you call those? The big vultures we get out there? I was walking, I took Stella on a long walk, and I'm telling you, I must have seen, there had to be 200 to 300 of those vultures. And they're just hanging out in one spot over by a cliff in a way that just felt far too casual. I mean, like we walked, like we got near them and they're just like, they're fine. And I suddenly felt like, so help me, I was in a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. But it's way worse when you're talking about like giant vultures. I mean, they're just birds. And they're kind of like, they're not pretty. They're kind of, and they look up and like playing with each other. Like they like fought. And it was like, and we're just a few feet away. And I'm like, what is God trying to tell me? What is the universe communicating to me right now about anything? I don't know. I don't know that I believe in bad omens, but I just feel like something about being surrounded by hundreds of vultures, it doesn't seem especially positive to me. But even something like that, I thought I have traveled the world a little bit, and I guess it has been in Africa more, where I've got to see like things in the wild, and it's just, I don't know, you see like a lion take down a zebra, and you just, even if you're watching this on National Geographic, you just have a sense of like just how small you are. So when I was in the lowest point in my life, what I always kind of refer to as my shipwreck season, I went on a little trip to San Diego, and there was a little retreat center there that was specifically, they do a lot of stuff with ministers who are going through things. And of course, I felt like my life was just completely unraveling and it was like such a mess. And while I was there, they assigned me a spiritual director. So a little nun came to about here on me. Of course, a lot of people come to about here on me. But she's like small woman, but like a spiritual ninja. I mean, she just, every day, she just took me apart in the best way. But I mean, like, she just took me apart. And I spent about an hour with her every day. And she's like, yeah, a little woman, like tan glasses, snow white hair, real bright blue eyes, just like this wonderful nun. And like very, very, very wise. And while she was there, she gave me a series of assignments. And one of those assignments was she asked me every day to walk the cliffs there. I can't remember because it has a name. The really big cliff there in San Diego that overlooks you see the water, you see the city. And I would go there every morning and I would look, and I'll never forget this feeling, because it's like on one side you see the city and you see a lot of natural beauty. And then just to my right, looking down on the other side, you see a graveyard. And there was something that happened to me every time I would go to that place, because I felt like I was reminded of, look at all this life, look at all this activity, look at all the beauty and the good things that are happening. And also, here's this graveyard. And it felt like a reminder to me that every single day, how many people are being born, every single day, how many people are dying. I don't know about almost any of it most of the time. I don't know most of those stories. And I was just overwhelmed by my sense of smallness. But the thing that was so interesting about that is that it didn't, and this is to me what I find now in these chapters of Job, is that sense of smallness it's not a curse. It's not a rebuke. It's not, what's wrong with you, little man? No, it's, we spend so much of our lives, because you know it is, whatever problems you have, whatever suffering we have, of course it feels like the biggest thing in the world. Nothing feels heavier than whatever it is that I'm going through at the time. Aren't we all, kids are like this all the time. Kingston woke us up at 2:40 wanting to fix something on his iPad. No shade, Kingston. The kids are like this, but really, aren't we all that way? It's kind of like, even if somebody around us is going through suffering that's much greater, sometimes it's hard to get past, even if it's a much smaller thing. But here's the thing that's right in front of me. It just feels like everything. And I think sometimes the only way that our problems get smaller, or if our whole lives get smaller, and there's the sense of, you know what, it doesn't make it hurt less. It doesn't mean the pain is any less real. But in the grand scheme of things, my life maybe isn't as big of a deal as I thought. Now, contextually, this is not the thing I say to people, just so you know, if anybody's ever struggling with like thoughts around like self-harm or something, I'm not going to tell somebody like, hey, your life is not a big deal. I think though then that's the moment where you need to hear your life has infinite worth and infinite significance. But I think there are a whole lot of times where what we really need to hear is you actually don't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You actually don't carry destinies. So many of the words that were spoken over me when I was a kid, and I think it's why I'm such an intense person now, because so much of what I heard, and I'm not saying it wasn't God or something, but I feel that always have these prophetic words or something that always made me feel like, well, I need to go and save the world. Well, guess what? I'm not capable of saving the world. And there is a certain point at which you collapse under that kind of pressure of feeling like, my life has such great value. When I was in middle school, I would prayerfully choose every single outfit because I thought, if I don't choose the right clothes, then I'm not operating the perfect will of God, which means a conversation that might happen with a lost person who might come up to me and say like, hey, why are you wearing that cool, this is 1991, why are you wearing that cool turtleneck? And then like now that conversation is not going to happen, which means I'm not going to share my faith with that person, which means they're not going to become a Christian, and they're not going to go to a tiny remote village where no one has ever heard the gospel, and then all the people aren't going to be saved, and ultimately people will suffer in torment and it will be all my fault. Like that was the way that I approached the world, like for so much of my life. And that sounds absurd, but I still think there's a lot of that in me, some sense of like, man, everything, whatever's happening, it just feels so big. The gift of Job is this very sweet way that God reminds us in the grand scheme of things, our lives are not as big as they feel like we are. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good to overlook an ocean. Sometimes it's good to be outside and to remember that in the grand scheme of things in the universe, we aren't in charge of anything. Not that much happens to us. Do you ever have this thought? This terrifies me and it liberates me. Have you ever thought like, let's see, it's 2024. How many people can you name, even famous people, that were alive 100 years ago? I mean, think about this. And you can think of a handful, like you'd be like, oh, well, here's the president, like whatever. Cool. That list is going to be pretty short of people that you're going to think of that were alive. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, it'll be, okay, I know that Abraham Lincoln lived and was a person. I've read a little bit about Abraham Lincoln. I don't know Abraham Lincoln. I mean, there are a handful of names from any given generation that the world is going to remember. And even then, how much do we really know about them way after the fact? I mean, it's depressing and super exciting in a way, because it's like this sense of, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, not one of us carries the weight of the universe in this way. It's true. At some point, eventually, everybody's forgotten, not by God. Not by God who says, you are my beloved in whom I'm well pleased, and you have infinite worth and value. But to the world, yeah. So what does that mean? That means that whatever makes me feel like right now, that destiny rests on my shoulders, yeah, that's definitely true. What if, does anybody else do this endlessly? All the kind of what ifs? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens to this person that I love? Will I be able to care for them? What if this situation doesn't turn out well? What if that situation doesn't go the way that I hope it does? You know what? However it goes, the world's going to keep on turning. And I think if we receive that from the right posture, that can be like a real gift, because that means we've got some room here. We've got some room to feel happy, some room to feel sad, some room to be wherever we are, but not to worry that if we don't carry the weight somehow, that everything's going to collapse. It's just not. Whatever it is that's been happening out there has been happening long before we got here. And it will happen long after we're gone, and we're just not in charge of it. That's the gift that God gives to Job at the end of this book, is the gift of smallness. Hear the difference, not insignificance. doesn't mean that what you feel, what you experience, what you care about doesn't matter to God. But you don't have to carry the weight of your shoulders, of everything working out. It's just not up to you. And gosh, sometimes I just need that reminder in my life that, however this thing goes, well, a lot of things are just, they're just not up to me. And then there's permission to breathe. There's permission to relax. There's permission to just be a human being and just not have to be in charge. Just not have to be in charge. So the gentle invitation from this sermon this morning is I hope that you can take a moment today that whatever you're dealing with, whatever you're going through, just not have to be in charge. To come apart if you need to come apart. I'll never forget that I don't claim to hear the voice of God all the time, but there are a handful of times in my life where I felt like that voice inside was pretty loud in a way that was significant to me. I'll never forget this. I didn't plan to share this either. Also, when I was at San Diego, because I was still trying to hold on to ministry while I was at the most fractured place in my life. And my sense was, I don't know if I can continue doing this work. I don't know if I'm supposed to do this work. I just, But at the time, I had started a church. And the church that I had started, praise God for this, but we started with a handful. And at that time, there were probably 1,500 people or so that called that church home, that, started with a small group. And now there's staff and there's livelihoods and all those kinds of things. And I always had that disposition anyway of like the world kind of being on my shoulder. So it's just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I remember specifically one of those days that I was out walking the cliffs there. I remember saying basically out loud to God, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I think I might just have to pick up a job at McDonald's. I'll never forget that. I said, I think I may just have to work at McDonald's. Now, what do you expect when you hear something like that and you're a person who's planted churches and preached and been preaching since I was 19 years old and all these kinds of things? I think there's a part of me that probably expected God to say something like, well, we can't have that. What you're doing is way too important. You got to go and do that. If I've ever felt like the Holy Spirit spoke to me, it was in that moment, and this is exactly what I heard. Who said you can't work at McDonald's? That was not what I expected. Who said you can't work at McDonald's? And like years later, it may not sound that way to you. It strikes me as like the most profound thing, because I had this sense of like, if I don't feel like I'm able to continue to do this same work the same way, then all these things will collapse. And it's very much kind of like, all right, well then maybe those things collapse. Maybe you collapse. It's the same thing I feel like God's saying to Job here. Playfully, who exactly do you think you are, little man? That if you need to work at McDonald's, then work at McDonald's, and the world will keep on turning, and that'll be all right. And once I got out of the sting of the ego of that for a moment, kind of like, is God not saying like, son, I need you to do this work. Only you are like able to do this. Like, I was able to receive like the liberation of that this way. God's saying like, I'm not making you do anything. If you need to work at the fast food place up the street and just like pay some bills and be a regular person for a while, then you do that. I'm not the one who's putting this kind of weight and this kind of pressure on you. That's the gift of the perspective that Job brings us. So I hope today that you can feel something of that perspective. I hope you can feel something of that liberating smallness that means wherever you are right now, wherever you need to be, that's all right. That's okay. And if that means that tomorrow you don't exactly feel like you can put one foot in front of the other, well, hey, like maybe tomorrow is a day where you need to rest. Maybe if right now you feel like you can't, maybe you actually shouldn't. So God, I just pray for my friends, because I know they, like me, are afflicted, as we all are in the world these days, with a sense that our lives almost have too much significance. We feel like the world revolves around our whims and desires. Sometimes, other times, it's just more that the pain just feels so dense. We don't know how we can bear that. So I just thank you for a reminder again today, graciously, that the world is big and wild and that we're allowed to be small in it. And I pray specifically for my friends who are here who have anything in their lives right now where's that sense of, if I can't pull this off, if I can't make this happen, if I can't make this right, what are folks going to do? And I just pray you would give them the grace this morning to be able to rest, that we're really not in charge of all that much, and we're really not in charge of other people, what they will do or not do, or how they'll respond. Even a season like this with the election and all the things happening around us, we know that you give us a part to play, but we're also just reminded too, there's a way that, but we're also not in charge. At the end of the day, there is only so much we can do about anything. So would you give us the grace today just to be able to trust that that you are good. And even though we don't know how everything is going to work out, or we don't know whether that's in our own lives or that's the world around us, there's a whole lot. We really don't know how it's going to go. But we know the more that we get to know you, that you are good, that you are love, and that we can trust you. So help us to let go today. Help us to yield. Help us to surrender. Help us to get a little bit smaller, knowing that the flip side of this is that while our lives are very small, that you say that you've numbered every hair on our heads, and there's not a sparrow that drops to the ground that you're not aware of. So though destinies don't rest on our shoulders, we're so valuable to you. So we rest in them. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.